gentlemen, we are about to get started. Please be seated. Thank you.
everyone, and welcome back after lunch. I hope you all enjoyed those delicious and diverse offerings. Next, we will be hearing from those at the very cutting edge of agri-tech, over from India to share their expertise on integrated, smart, and sustainable agriculture platforms. Please welcome Navarun Atre of Transitory, Vaibhav Tidke of S4S Technologies, Prateep Basu of Satshore, Taranjeet Bamra of AgNext, and moderating this panel, we have from Taiwan, Hatakan Kamalsiri Sakul.
Okay, we're missing one.
Oh.
Vaibhav. Hello. He's just right here. We're missing one. Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you. See, anything can go wrong, especially right after lunch. All right. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Taran, second year for you. Prateep, first year, and thank you for being here, and Navarun as well. And as soon as we locate Vaibhav, welcome on stage. Okay. So this panel was intentionally put. So if we think about, in the next, by 2050, the global population is going to be 9 billion. How do we feed? But also if we look within the agri-tech sector itself, or agri sector itself, 30 or even more than 30% of the carbon emission comes from the agri-tech side. And India, of course, being one of the largest country in terms of population, is driving a lot of that. But this also means solutions in India can drive a lot of change as well. So we have curated this panel with, the top startups from India and innovators as well, just to share about what's going on in India, what's been happening. Is there any learning that we can learn from the country itself? So maybe I think there was a consensus during the pre-call that Taran, you being, a veteran, second year for us, perhaps you can kick us off telling about yourself and your company as well.
Thank you so much, Gamma. I think it's a pleasure to be here. And I was not part of the consensus. I was made. But I must say that the event has gone strength from the last time. And I'm pretty sure the ecosystem that the region needs for all the agri innovators to come together has found a cornerstone at Thaiva. So much applaud for this event, actually, for doing this event. Thank you so much, first of all, on behalf of all agri innovators. But now, what brings us here is that the question, right? So the question is about, how agriculture tech started in India in the last 10 years and how it has evolved, and what we have seen, typical to what India does, first software and then AI and then things of hardware towards the end. What we had seen in agri ecosystem is that we started with a lot of applications of hardware in the upstream around 10 years back. Whether it is the seafood like e-fisheries in Indonesia, there were a lot of Aruwaka, etc., which worked a lot on IoT applications. Then there were a lot of innovations that were started with other hardware interventions in upstream. But then suddenly we found that India had gone big in downstream with market linkages, and that had scaled significantly for healthcare and other segments in India. So that's where the next startup came of doing the downstream or market linkages, and that scaled significantly in India. But after around 7 to 8 years in this, what eventually was found was that connecting the upstream and the downstream, there is something called a messy middle. The middle stream is something that has been missing. And that's where I think supply chain innovations came out in the last 3-4 years, especially after the COVID. And people realize that actually now the hardware, software, and AI has to come together to solve for midstream and then connect both the upstream and the downstream together. I think this has now finally evolved into what we call as the end-to-end solution stack that few startups have actually understood and now scaling much faster. So the whole ecosystem evolved in a way you can see of what tech stack was first built, which area it was applied, and now what are the various expertise that startups have built in India. And add to that is the overall ecosystem that is being curtailed, not curtailed, provided or by the government of India. For example, this entire tech stack that is being built by India, similar to UPI, everyone knows that the government brought in UPI, and India surpassed China in payments in just 3 years. Today is the largest, doing multi-billion transactions per second. And similarly, government focused a lot on Agri infrastructure fund. So a lot of funding is happening from the government side in order to scale the entire hardware and infrastructure in India. And I think there are a lot of other interventions that have helped catapult all of us startups to actually utilize this time and scale in India. And I think this is where what brings us to talk about that, today it is all about adoption and collaboration. So with Southeast Asia, what we should be all looking is adoption of tech as fast as possible in any field that is there. And the second is collaboration multi-continent. It is not just about Southeast Asia, India. It is about Southeast Asia, Europe, Southeast Asia, Australia, etc. That has to scale much faster than what the current state is. This is what I think. Otherwise, I will keep talking. So I think you should stop.
Thank you, Taran. But just a quick one before we move on. That was really insightful. I think support from the government driving adoption, and also on the supply chain innovations that's coming out of the country as well. But before I move on, maybe a quick one on what AgNext does.
Yeah. So at AgNext, we focus on building trust, which we believe was one of the biggest issues for smallholder farmers to be linked to the market. And that's why you will see a lot of intermediaries in the Asian ecosystem, where they have to collate, aggregate, and then kind of build market linkages, leaving a pittance to the farmers in the end. So the whole idea was, how can we build trust to the end buyers? And this can only be done if you solve it very, very simply. I always tell Cam, I'm more of a mathematics guy. So I solve agriculture with mathematics. It's as simple as that any transaction that you do, it's a function of two things: how much quantity you are buying and how much quality you are buying. Now, quantity is digitized, but quality is not digitized. And this is where the most issues happen in agriculture, where the trust is not understood. And that's why for 7 years, we just kept building technology that can analyze food in less than 1 minute. And the moment we did that, we were able to analyze rice, we were able to analyze wheat, turmeric, spices. We actually, last 1 year back, we just started putting it as a trust platform and giving it to buyers so that they know 2,000 kilometers away what they are buying. This platform was open, and within no time, we scaled to around $70-80 million of ARR in just 7 to 8 months by applying this technology. So this is where we believe that a lot of persistence on 7 to 8 years of building a very core IP on quality analysis and then scaling it on a platform mode has helped us, AgNext, to understand the core proposition that Asia needs, which is trust to the buyer.
Okay, thanks, Taran. Just wanted to highlight, I think there's an element of the software as well as the hardware innovation. Vaibhav, I think you can probably share an example of what you do as well and how that links.
Well, thanks. So my name is Vaibhav. I represent S4S Technologies. So we are basically a food processing platform. If you look at overall Indian structure, we are almost $400 billion of agriculture output. Over that, almost $200 billion goes into the food processing, and then final customers lie into either domestic tabletop consumption, FMCG, hotel, restaurant, caterers, or exports. This is how the structure of Indian market is. Now, if you look at the processing has been mainly dominated by farmers supplying their goods to local markets, typically between 3 to 5 aggregators, and then SMEs processing these food products into food ingredients and giving into either FMCG companies or other food ingredient players. So that's a play where we come into picture. We specifically look into creating full stack solutions in the food processing platform. At a village level, we create a procurement and the processing units with the help of women farmers, where they produce, they buy B and C grade produce from farmers, which generally goes as a waste and convert into food ingredients. So just taking example, tomatoes will be converted to tomato powder, milk can be converted to milk powder, and so on and so forth. So that is a area that we are into, roughly processing almost 400, 500 tons per day capacity and annual revenue of around $20 million. So that's the scale we operate with. And coming to your question, how we look at technology in the whole play is that food processing, we categorize into 3 buckets. Primary processing, where the raw material is converted into a shelf-stable product. Secondary processing, where it is converted into a more of a finished food ingredient. And tertiary processing, where it is made available to the customers, where they can consume it. So at Espores, we do primary processing at farm gate, so that material becomes shelf-stable with the help of solar-powered hardwares. Then we do secondary processing more of an aggregate level. We procure from almost 60,000 farmers and 2,000 entrepreneurs, collect the material, do a secondary processing, ensure quality to the customer. And then tertiary processing lies with the FMCG players. So that's how structurally we look into. And there are 3 pieces of technology. Number 1, core is a hardware, which is a patented product where food ingredients can be manufactured using solar energy. Second is a food engineering. How do you carry out the processes which will be done at a farm gate level, where manpower is not trained, those are not food engineers, those are not supervisors, how you do that. And the third piece is to bring transparency, to bring productivity and efficiency, use of digitization. So hardware at the core, layering of food engineering, and at the top layer, digitization. So these are the 3 layers in which we look at the entire structure of tech at Esperis.
Supply chain, hardware, software, it all links well together. And one thing we met earlier this year, where we went to Mumbai, I think we met in Mumbai. I loved how within your business model, you're able to include women farmers into the mix as well. Maybe you share just a little bit on that.
Surely. So when we looked at the Indian markets initially, for hardwares, we realized that decision makers are mainly men. But when we entered to the market, did a pilot, we realized that our users, customers are women farmers. And once we realized that, we created our entire business model in such a way that creating women at the center of a supply chain and at a customer level. And we basically figured out whatever they need. So we created banking linkages with largest bank in India called State Bank of India, NABARD, and Bank of Maharashtra at a state level, where once Esperis recommends that these are trained women to start food processing, they get asset financing. We ensure regular raw material supplies and zero risk of working capital for these women entrepreneurs. Third, we provide the morning issue of technical assistance around how do we train them to procure and process food material. And fourth, provide a market linkage. So with this structure of creating a complete ecosystem about women entrepreneurs and women farmers, we are able to transform the entire supply chain with the women. So all our procurement and processing is done 100% by women farmers at a local level.
Wonderful. Okay. Just wanted to highlight another one. That, we talked about building that ecosystem. It sounds like you have that ecosystem partnership, public-private financial institutions as well. Prateep, your company itself does a lot with the financial institutions and public institutions as well. Maybe will you share a little bit more?
Yep. So firstly, thank you for inviting me to this panel. When I was, just before this panel started, I was getting tips from Taran and my other colleagues, like what should I speak about? Because we are actually a fully integrated space tech firm. Now, agriculture happens to be one of the areas or sectors where we are operating. But the story here to say is how we have moved the needle on agri financing. So both Taran and Weber spoke about the entire supply chain. Let me give an insight on how using data for scalable and trustworthy data, one can move the needle on financing smallholder farmers. So the story for us was that because our backgrounds are all aerospace engineering and all, we always thought that let's work with enterprises on data models, and banks were the, let's say, early adopters of any kind of fintech innovation. So it was more of a problem solving thing, that how can we solve the problems for banks to lend more to farmers and have their outreach collections all sorted, because it's a very loss making sector, especially in India. If I give you a context of numbers, the current loan book in India would be about annually $200 billion, of which 140 to 150 is just crop financing, farm financing. Out of that number, it represents only 42% penetration of credit. So there is so much of unserved number of farmers who are going through middlemen channels with high interest rate. The cost of debt is extremely high in India. That's one thing to understand. And this financing is extremely important to invest in your farms at the right low cost capital at the right time at the right place is what we wanted to solve. That was the problem statement. Now, how does data from space come into place? You have a good thing about satellites is there is history. Risk is all about history. So how do you identify the patterns of changing cropping, changing weather, productivity, merge that with the market variations that are happening, and create a holistic way to estimate the default probabilities of at a farm level, at a regional level, and show that there is some kind of correlation with actual delinquency, because no satellite imagery can predict the credit risk. So I see a lot of nowadays, when we started 5.5 years back, it was still very early. People were targeting insurance companies and all using this kind of data. But nowadays I see satellite imagery for credit risk model. It doesn't work like that. I'm sorry. So today, what we have achieved is by working very closely with the financial institutions in India. Earlier, it was the private sector banks who were the early adopters. Today, it's the public sector banks also who are scaling these solutions of a score and rating based to identify the risk of default for a farmer. It becomes especially important in the event of climate-related events, which are increasing the repayment capacity. And by providing this information on a technology stack where they can access it in a matter of seconds, what they would have otherwise taken 10 to 15 days, which means that loan processing time was anywhere between 30 to 60 days overall. That has come down to now 20 minutes for many of the banks. It's an instant loan approval by doing a credit bureau check and a land check and a crop check through us. So this is kind of transformational, I think, globally, not just India. But globally, people are looking at Indian banks really adopting technology for improving the way financing happens in agriculture. I gave recently a keynote talk at Rabobank, which is the largest food and agri bank in the world. We are partners with them as well. And indeed, the first of its kind, a bureau plus a satellite-derived single credit check report has been launched with TransUnion Sibyl by us recently. And I think only the next few years would be very interesting to see how all the efforts of government to create a data ecosystem where financial transactions, the sale of fertilizer seeds, everything can be recorded properly, ledgered, and then driven to improve this kind of system further.
So it sounds like a lot of government effort as well as investments have been put in to drive the whole ecosystem.
Yes, absolutely. And since we are speaking of how we could all learn from each other, I think if we are starting on such kind of initiatives or innovations in Southeast Asia, the first thing to do is have your governments buy in to invest in data infrastructure, or else you will become like me. That was how I used to look when I started Satshot. Now this is here.
Okay, and that's how you scale, and scale fast as well. Not only going by yourself, but with the government as well, backing you as the wind. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you, thank you. May I shift gear to Navarun? Perhaps tell us a little bit more about Transhistory, and you work very closely with the farmers, I think not only in India, but across Asia Pacific as well.
Yep, sure. So I think a few things have been mentioned earlier. We were talking about trustworthy data. we were talking about risk being about history. So where we started our journey as Transitory is basically as a digital monitoring, reporting, and verification solution provider, primarily for regenerative agriculture and targeting the carbon markets. Now, essentially, what is very important, and I think this was rightly mentioned, that can a pure credit rating be done based only on satellite technology? Not really. You do need ground truthing for that to happen. And for us, what we are putting forward for farmers, and this includes both corporate farms as well as smallholders, is that we have our own purpose-built blockchain platform, essentially to collect and manage data in a format where it's credible, it's trustworthy, and it's auditable. And finally, because there is this access to first-party data, we are able to create the risk analysis that is associated with these projects. And again, when we talk about the sources of data, certainly there is involvement of open source satellite data, but having said that, the more reliable data comes from the ground. So it can be your soil sampling data, it can be data on the history of the crops as well as the vegetation which was there in the past over, let's say, the 5 to 10 years in the past. So that is where a lot of credibility comes in. And apart from that, because we have access to all the historical data, what we also have as a solution is a time series analysis-based AI model, which essentially lets you know what is the potential of carbon sequestration or greenhouse gas emission mitigation in the future for these projects. Now, this is very important because we were talking about financing, and we are also talking about carbon markets here. So in terms of green financing, to enable green financing to flow into these projects, it's very important for the decision makers to have access to these insights. So this is something that we're enabling through both the analytics based on the current data as well as the predictive analytics based on our AI. And on top of that, because we are also focusing on the carbon credit sales, so there are two ways that carbon credits are sold: spot sales and forward sales. And forward sales is a market which is a bit more speculative in nature. So essentially, that is where we do need an understanding of what exactly is going to happen in the future. Now, having said that, again, there is a matter of accuracy. How accurate are we in predicting how we will be sequestering carbon in the future? Today, our model is at 80%. We need to bump it up to 90% and beyond. And that is where a lot of the credibility again comes back. I think one of the previous sessions, Mary was mentioning there needs to be transparency of financial systems. I would like to probably drill down a bit deeper. There needs to be transparency of data collection on ground first, and then we can create the transparency of the financial systems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely agree. I mean, for Taiwan itself, we work with 30 to now probably 50,000 farmers as well. Ground truth data is very important. Even before we do any satellite imaging, we need to get on the ground to get the data from the farmers, and that's where things happen. Yeah. Okay.
Right, absolutely. So that's us in a nutshell. I'll probably explain more later.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We are at the Southeast Asia Agri-Food Roundtable, right? These are innovators from India. What opportunities are you seeing that you think can bring in to Southeast Asia as well? Vaibhav, maybe perhaps you first.
For us, again, from company perspective, the unit of replication for us is a geography or a cluster. And if you look at micro level, it's a village. So one procurement area where enough number of farmers are growing a range of agri-produce, and the opportunity is that we can procure and process. So this entire playbook, entire structure is ready that we have scaled up in India across multiple states. And what we are trying to see is that is the model ready, is the playbook ready so that it can be replicated in some of the other geographies. Africa and Asian countries are the next opportunities that we see in terms of targeting and piloting. And with the help of Thaiba, we're really making those field visits, meeting farmers, understanding the structure of supply chain here, and seeing what opportunity for us as a supply chain company lies here. So I think the overall point is that finding out what are the markets which are similar to Indian context, and something that has been worked in India, can that be taken outside India, and look from that angle.
Okay. Navarun, do you think because we're all smallholder farmers here in India, in Southeast Asia, is there a difference in terms of your customer group?
So in terms of, I would say, the different markets, Southeast Asia as well as India. So for us, from a personal perspective, we started with the first market in Indonesia, actually. And the second market for us was India. So I think in terms of the difficulties in consolidating the smallholder farmers, that's something which is very similar to both of these ecosystems. Now, when it comes to the way corporate farms work, that's where probably there's a bit of difference. However, having said that, in the context of our solution particularly, so we built the solution with a service model first because the service model allowed us to understand the value chain, and then we created the product on top of that value chain. So the product, the way it is right now, it's very agnostic in nature, and we are able to extend the product to any of these ecosystems, essentially, whether it be India, Indonesia, Malaysia, and also we are present in Uganda as well. But again, it's pretty flexible at this point of time, primarily because we are a data platform first, and that allows us to sort of expand really fast. But in terms of our experience with smallholder farmers, so our approach has been to work with other consolidators, including FPOs. And the reason we have to do that is also because for smallholder farmers, and this was mentioned before, for them to take up a new technology, to understand the digital technology, and to adopt it and implement new practices, it's a very high risk that they're taking. They're probably operating on maybe 1 to 2 hectares of land, and that is certainly not giving them enough space to experiment. It's their livelihood at stake. So when it comes to the FPOs or other consolidators, there is that bit of trust that it's not just one farmer by themselves. It's a group of farmers coming together with a few tested, probably even low-risk implementations first, and then we can go ahead and apply something which is a bit more high risk. So, for example, including a tested biofertilizer might be an easier option, but involving a process of no tillage, it's always seen that farmers are very hesitant to go for a no tillage process.
Thank you so much. I think this also echoes what the discussion in Grow Asia panel workshop yesterday about, rather than going to one by one to each farmer, I think there's validity in sort of bringing together, going to big farming communities to deploy the solutions together, because farmers tend to stick together as well. If friends do something, they will do something as well.
Just to add on that, it's also a matter of unit economics.
Yes.
Because 2 hectares by itself, if you were to do a sustainability project, it's not viable in the form of justifying the unit economics. So certainly it helps with that.
Okay. So I thank you so much, Narun. I think we had 30 minutes on this panel and we're running out, but all the conversations are very interesting. I think we can spend the whole day on it. But just a quick one, I just wanted to open the question to the audience, maybe 1 or 2 questions. Does anyone have any? Yes, Matt.
Very interesting comments. Thank you all. Just trying to understand India, how much of government policy has contributed to the success of your individual operations? And can you give me examples of those policies, if they have?
Prateep first, perhaps?
A lot. That's the short answer. And I think that would be also one of my, let's say, recommendations when we are, building up the ag-tech ecosystem in Southeast Asia, that be involved in the policy making. For example, let's take the initiative of the Agri stack, or they call it IDEA platform in India. So that was the aggregation of all kinds of data sets that the government has anyway invested, but it's lying in different silos to make it come together for land identification, farmer identification, crop identification. It required different types of companies. It required startups, large tech guys, state governments, all kinds of supply chain startups, ag input players, FMCG players, to come together and build this state by state without a challenge, like keeping the sovereignty of the country intact. As agriculture is state subject, and that is still work in progress. But what it has done is it's moving towards the UPI system, which India built and has change the way like financing and transactions happens in India, and that's what the government is looking to do. All this wouldn't have been possible if the government was not aligned as to what is the vision.
Yeah. I'll add to this point. India produces around 70 to 80 million metric tons of grains. Uh, just recently, India, few states, and the central also procurement agency has made it mandatory that AI-based grain analyzers need to be put for every transaction. This is incomprehensible because nowhere in the world has any government put a kind of that AI grain analyzers need to, now review uh, every grain transaction that happens in India. Imagine there are 100,000 mandis overall in India or market locations. 100,000 being implemented, that's the scale we are talking about with our tech. This is just one enabler. But if I talk more, for example, after working grains, Agnext has started working in herbals and medicinal plants. So we're building entire traceability for herbals and medicinal plants, and it's the government which came and they said, we will build a platform with you. This platform, trusted platform, which will give entire traceability from which mountain, which medicinal herb came, and which pharma company is buying. The entire platform, the government actually offered to work along with us in order to build that and link it to the market. So this kind of thing, and I mean, Agnext has been, we have been part of Abu Dhabi Sovereign Fund also investment, and now there's a Swiss-backed fund that has also invested in us. So there are 3 sovereign kind of entities backing Agnext, but you can see that with the Indian government thought process of, whatever the market potential for medicinal and herbs is so high, and I think it's the same in Indonesia and Thailand, and it needs to be connected. The government realized it, and they only intervened that you need to bring a blockchain, you need to bring a traceability, you need to bring payment to the farmer on the very day by evaluating quality. Because the risk is of quality. So the farmer credit cycles are 30 to 90 days. The government said if you do this, they will get paid on that very day. So they then pushed a nationalized bank to work with us. So this is the kind of speed and innovation that the government is moving, which I believe is phenomenal. Yeah.
Mm. And we'd like to see that in Southeast Asia as well, where different countries,
For sure.
so policies need to align, and if we get a government push to push us up, it's
That's
great.
what we are saying, Cam. The end products of our ecosystem can be shared and partnered here. We don't have to. I mean, if we let's say we work on medicinal plants in Vietnam and let's say Thailand or Indonesia, we don't have to think through what all things, or all startups don't have to go through the cycle of again 3, 4. Whatever we have accumulated and put together there, I think it just needs to be copied and scaled here.
Perfect. And I know, Sophie, we're out of time, but I think it's tradition now that everyone just started. At the end of the panel, there's a lightning round. So each one by one, maybe start with you, Navroon. Quick, 15 seconds, no more. Where are you going to be in the next 5 years?
Probably the primary organization creating trust in the sustainability market and enabling the largest volume of green financing.
Okay.
So for us, it's building a supply chain, and we really look at how we can reach out to 1 million farmers in the period of next 3 to 5 years.
Well, I hope that in the next 5 years, every third transaction that happens in Agri goes through Satya's platform.
Oh,
I think I had a clear. When 2016 I came back to India and started this, my password was related to IPO 2025. So
NASDAQ, you told me.
yes.
You told me NASDAQ.
So I have it still on my wall. The password is different. I don't want to, tell
NASDAQ, I
everyone.
remember.
But we might have an IPO earlier in a local place rather than NASDAQ. But I'm pretty sure that Agnext will have a IPO by 2027.
Okay.
And a smaller IPO maybe at a local venue. So look out for 2025. I will still abide by my password.
Thank you so much. That was for the VCs. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Hatikan, and to all our panelists there. Next, we're going to be switching our focus to food technologies, and this panel is The New Food Frontier, Scaling Novel Foods. And I'm delighted to welcome our panel of experts, Jolene Lum of Neurasa, Eugene Wang of Sophie's Bionutrients, Didier Toubier of Aleph Farms, and Michael Klar of Better Bite Ventures. Welcome to you all. Oh, and moderating, how could I possibly forget? We've got Merte Goska of the Good Food Institute Asia.
Thank you, Sophie. So everybody's sitting down. Hello, everyone. So I usually spend my Sunday mornings at the Hollandse Club in Singapore, where my kids go to their hockey training and their swimming classes. So at 11 a.m. sharp, I'm running after one of them, trying to convince her to put her goggles on and get in the pool. What I'm not doing at 11 a.m. sharp on Sunday mornings is making a reservation at Huber's Butchery, which is the only place in the whole wide world where you can taste cultivated meat 4 days later on Thursday. So if I don't make that reservation on Sunday, I'm not eating cultivated meat on Thursday. And the reason for that is because supply is still super limited. Today I'm joined by a panel of experts on the topic of scaling novel foods. And I'm very excited to talk about this topic, not just because I'm a little bit bummed that I keep on promising my friends that I'll feed them cultivated meat, but I don't, but because we need to find a smarter way to create meat. The way we currently produce meat is highly inefficient. It emits 20% of global greenhouse gases, and it causes a ton of public health risks. So let's get started and let's set the stage first. Where are we with regards to scaling up novel foods today? Eugene, I would like to start with you. In our pre-call, you shared that you are currently producing 1 ton of products every year and that you need to scale up to 1,000 tons in order to break even. You also shared that your current cost price is 10 euros per kilo above your point of sales. Can you tell a little bit more about the product that you're making and what you do? And yeah, please put these numbers a little bit in context.
So right now we're a Singapore-based company, by the way. I think a lot of you folks know that. But because of a lot of limitations in Asia, so we're now scaling up in Europe. So we're doing fermentation in Portugal, and then we ship it up to the Netherlands to fraction the protein. So our upstream is done in one country, our downstream process is done in another. So you can imagine multiple drying, multiple shipping, that doesn't make the cost ideal. On top of that, we have a scale issue because we're a startup. So the orders, the samples request is small, so I cannot produce 1,000 tons a year. It will go to waste. I can only produce 1 ton a year. And with all these added, we quote everyone 25 euro per kilo, where in fact our cost is way over 35 euro per kilo. That's what happened. Now, if we have all the money in the world, which we don't, we can then set up the production in one location. That would dramatically, right away, bring down the cost. And on top of that, if we can go out and hire more salespeople, convince more people to buy it, then possibly we can bring out volume. So talking about the price, the cost issue, it is a simple economic equation. You said plant-based is expensive because not enough people are eating plant-based. If we have more people eating more plant-based, the demand will come up, the production will come up, it will come down the price as well. As simple as that.
That makes sense. Economies of scale. DJ, over to you. Your products, cultivated meat, are not ready for sale. I tasted it. It tastes really good. But you have a 65,000 square foot facility in Israel. You also closed a deal with Esco Aster, the cultivated meat co-manufacturer in Singapore. So please share a little bit about your scale-up plans, and also maybe you can tell us how Southeast Asia plays a role in that.
Yes, thanks, Mirte, and nice to be with you all here. Thanks for to Temasek, Taiwan, and Rethink for having us. Ale Farms is one of the leaders in the field of what we call cellular agriculture, meaning we produce food on the base of cell cultures instead of growing animals. And the rationale behind that is that, as Mirte mentioned, the conventional agriculture based on farming whole animals, slaughtering them, or taking milk from them in the case of cows, has reached its maximum scale in terms of natural resources and climate impact. And we believe that in order for us to be able to continue and thrive and feed with delicious and high quality food, the 9 billion people will be in the planet soon, we need to incorporate new sources for animal products. And we see cells as a complement to meat and dairy. If we're talking about cattle, at Ale Farms we deal with cells from beef. And not to replace the meat as we know it today, but to reduce the load, the pressure on conventional agriculture so that we can farm less animals, better manage them, and complement them with cells. Cells are the building blocks of animals. So instead of farming big animals, we farm small animals, we farm cells actually, outside of the animal in a controlled environment with a fraction of the resources. We're committed to be net zero, meaning to neutralize our climate impact. And as Mirte mentioned, there are also a bunch of public health issues which we're addressing, and we can also decentralize the production of beef, providing more resilience in the food system, diversifying the supply for more food sovereignty. And in terms of scale, which is a big, let's say, central topic in our scale, in our space, we believe that for a startup in the novel food space, there is an inherent contradiction between food on one hand and innovation on the other hand. Innovation is expensive. We see, how electric vehicles started, renewable energies and photovoltaic cells were also very expensive when they started. Cell phones, digital cameras, innovation is expensive when it starts. On the other hand, food is a cheap product. We're not in the medical device industry or biotech. And solving this equation of an expensive technology in the cheap market is an inherent challenge to the novel food. The way we look at it at Ale Farms is really to disconnect the product development and brand risk, which is one risk which is significant, meaning developing the right product market fit, building the brand, driving the demand for the product, educating the market, from the risk of scaling up. We believe that taking the two risks at once for a startup is too much. So we decided to focus on the first one, and we're partnering with Thai Union, for instance, in Thailand, and building a consortium here to build production capacities. In Singapore, we're working with EDB and Temasek on one hand and sign an agreement with ESCO, Aster, to build the plant and operate it for us. Nuresa is working on a similar model, and we believe that what we'll see more and more are entities such as Nuresa, for instance. There are also a few in the US, especially for precision fermentation, Synonym and others, which will focus on taking upon them the scale-up challenge. So we'll see a kind of a dichotomy between companies focusing on product and brand and companies focusing only on production and taking one risk at a time.
Yeah, and it's just a very complicated dichotomy to navigate, I guess. So Jolene, over to you. DJ already mentioned you. So Nurasa is trying to bridge the gap between lab scale to commercial scale, novel food technology scale, the scale up. Can you tell a little bit more, especially with regards to your JV with ADM and Scale Up Bio, so with regards to fermentation-derived proteins, what are you doing in this space, and why is it so important that you're present in Singapore?
Thank you, Meta. So as Meta alluded to, we have a contract manufacturing and development offering, a joint venture with ADM. So between Nurasa and ADM, we have a joint venture called Scale Up Bio. They are a premier offering in precision fermentation. So we actually don't have a cultivated meat offering yet, but we have 2 facilities coming up in Singapore. one at pilot scale with bioreactor capacity up to 100 liters with downstream processing, and then a slightly larger scale, which I wouldn't call commercial, but a larger pilot at 10,000 liters of capacity in Singapore with relevant downstream processing. What we also have is building up a team of bioprocess engineers, microbiologists, who can support not just with infrastructure, but actually come into a startup with either an incomplete technical team or is still in that prototyping and scale-up phase to actually troubleshoot that technical process of scaling up that precision fermentation process. Of course, Singapore is the only one that remains open for approval with novel food, and there's a pathway. So it is very popular with companies who are working in the precision fermentation space. And I think for now, Singapore remains the first location for us. Not sure what's going to happen in the future, but it is very suitable at the moment for companies to enter Asia through Singapore and to navigate the novel food regulation in Singapore.
Thank you. And before I move to Mikhail, first wanted to ask one question to Eugene again, because Eugene, you actually moved away from Singapore about, I think, 3 years ago. That was long before Scale Up Bio was there, long before Nurasa was even there. Would you do the same today? And can you maybe just explain also a little bit about the advantages and the disadvantages that you see between Europe and Asia?
Right. So first of all, we're still being based in Singapore. No, don't get me wrong. We're not going away. It's just the operation-wise, especially during the pandemic, you know how much hassle it is to travel so much. So that's why we have to move the operation to Europe. Now, speaking the limitations of what we have coming up against here in Asia, there are so many things that I can talk about, but I can break it down to 3 simple things. Number 1 is cell. C-E-L-L, not sales, cell. So the cell I'm talking about in Alette Farms' case is cell line. For the culture meat and seafood guys, it is really hard to find a good cell line right here in Asia. Well, it's a new technology, so it's hard to find anywhere in the world, for sure. But then again, you have better chance, better odds to find a great cell line in US or Europe versus in Asia. So that's difficulty number 1. And in our case, we're a microbial fermentation company. By the way, I don't know if I told you. No, I haven't. We're fermenting microalgae to grow protein, and we extract the protein from microalgae, like Corella spirulina. So that's our technology. So in our case, the cell I'm referring to is a data bank, a library of different microalgae. Now, that is very hard to find in Singapore, almost zero, as you can imagine. Very hard to find anywhere in Southeast Asia as well. You can find something in Korea, in Japan, in China, in Taiwan, and a lot more in the US, and even more in Europe. I just run into a school in Portugal. They have 5,000 plus different strains of microalgae that I can tap into. Out of that 5,000, 3,000 is found in local Portuguese and Spanish water. Think about that, how many years they spend to go to the wild to collect that. So that's number 1 we're missing. Number 2 we're missing is people, talents. I'm not talking about people with the degree. I'm talking about people with experiences, real experiences. Now, here in Asia, when I talk to the contract manufacturers, they always said to me that you got to give me the data from maybe 1 ton of fermentation before I can help you scale up to 10,000 liter, 10 ton, or 100 ton. In Europe, they said to me, you just give me the lab data. We'll take care from there. That's night and day, as you can imagine. Another example, in the Netherlands, I got experts who can tell me, oh, your chain of protein is too short for emulsifying or too globulin to become fibrous meat. They can tell me down to that degree. I'm having a huge problem finding that kind of talent in Asia to do that. That's the second thing we lack. Third thing we lack is no border. We have too many borders here in Asia. We have a Southeast Asian alliance, yes, true. But then to bring in machines or talents from India, say, for example, to Singapore, do you know how many paperwork I have to go through? And all the great talents are in India, so sadly to report, And then not to mention the machines. If I want a piece of machine, say, Nurasa have to help bring me to their factory, I guarantee you it's months. In Europe, that's the beautiful thing. I need a beam miller. So the contract manufacturer just called up a vendor in Germany. 10 days after, it shows up on the factory floor. Because why? There's no border. They can just ship. And better yet, I don't have to buy. I can lease it. I can rent it by days, by months, by weeks, whatever I want to do. And that's the kind of flexibility I have in Europe. I was told you can get that in the States as well, but I haven't been there. So, but you can imagine the night and day difference. So that's what it comes down to. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We have a lot of things to unpack here. I heard talent, government, collaboration, regulation, infrastructure, consumer demand we haven't even spoken about, and finance is also something. So I first want to ask Mikhail, finance, who is going to pay for all this? Because it's obviously not VCs like yourself.
Yes, I mean, like we are good at financing 0 to 1. That's what we are specializing in. In our case, it's 0 to 0.1, I guess, because we are very early stage investors in pre-seed and seed. But VC model is not really compatible with, financing large scale-up, big manufacturing facilities and so on. So we need, I think, several things. We need some novel financing models for this industry. And I actually see some things popping up. I just spoke with a company that is doing quite interesting thing in the US and potentially expanding to Asia as well, with providing loans to companies that are at Series B, so somewhat de-risked. So basically they attach themselves to Series B, they offer extra 5 to 50 million for equipment specifically. The interest rate is a little higher than bank, but most banks would not finance the equipment at this stage. They still consider it too risky. And this guy's worked with Meaty, Impossible Foods, Nature's Finds, many of large and well-known established startups in this space. So this is a very interesting model that sort of makes sense of the startups for this at this stage. Another company that comes to mind and another model is a startup called Synonym. And they are trying to set up basically a platform that would connect startups that are looking for fermentation or cultivated meat, especially fermentation, I think precision fermentation equipment, with folks who can finance it, but specifically for individual facilities. So basically imagine that the company needs $50 to $100 million for a specific facility to set up precision fermentation, scale up, and they will find financiers for this specific facility with specific return profile and so on. And they started, this is still under development, but they started from providing very interesting catalog of about 150 to 200 existing CDMOs in the world that already have fermentation capacity. So, these are just examples of these new financing models that I think we need, but because as you said, Mirta, it's not going to be early stage VCs that are going to finance.
So we need more creative and especially patient capital to make this really work. Yeah. So DJ, I want to talk a little bit more about the role of governments, and then we can speak about regulations, novel food regulations. Singapore is obviously the world leader. How can we disseminate their learnings? How can we apply those to other regions? But there's also something else which is not specifically government, but labeling is very often government. It's a priority and a responsibility of the government, but what about religious labeling? I know you had a breakthrough in Israel with regards to kosher labeling. Maybe you can share that with the audience. And is there something that we can learn from there to potentially also get to halal certification for novel foods? Because that would open up markets like Malaysia and Indonesia, very important here, of course.
Of course, I'll start with the regulation, and we can put the regulatory affairs as part of a wider angle of public-private partnerships to leverage what my colleagues have said, and which also connected to the financing of scale-up. It's clear that VCs are not suitable for funding large-scale facilities, and even in 2021 we saw very large rounds of cultivated meat companies or others raising $200 million to fund production facilities. That does not happen anymore. the large institutional investors moved away from those early stage big investments and refocus on later stage companies. So from our standpoint at Alephons, we're on one hand working with partners to co-invest or outsource part of the production with CDMOs, but we're also working on public-private partnerships with government helping not only with direct support in funding the plants, but also potentially providing loan guarantees to help getting project financing. We're also working with our partners on off-take agreements, which is actually a commitment to purchase some of the production of the plant to de-risk the investment for more institutional investors. We also believe that the governments will have a role in tax and other subsidies to really promote the initial stages of scaling up the businesses, same as they had a role for renewable energies, for instance. Renewable energies wouldn't be here today if governments wouldn't have, at the time, supported and built a friendly framework for those technologies to really go through the initial stages of scale up and cost reduction. So we will need the same type of partnership, and part of that is regulation. Regulation is usually managed by the government agencies. And here, there's a huge, let's say, variety of different regulatory bodies and set of requirements. At Alephons, we filed the regulatory submission both in Singapore and Israel, and we hope, crossing fingers, we can get cleared in both countries relatively soon toward the launch later this year. But what we need, I think, is more harmonization of the regulation on one hand, and there had been some initiatives led by Singapore, by the way, by SFA, with Australia, with South Korea, China. There are some communications between the Israel Ministry of Health and the SFA. We're trying to open more communication with the Thai FDA as well. So we need one, harmonization and communication to kind of set more standard requirements. And second, I think that we need also to pool resources where the assessment of a novel food dossier requires intensive review with a very specific set of expertise, which not any regulatory body has available in-house. SFA is working very closely with STAR and with external advisors, which is a great model. We're doing the same in Israel, by the way, with the Israel Innovation Authority as in collaboration with the Ministry of Health. So we need to pool resources to bring in additional expertise. And overall, by the time innovation in food is considered as a priority for the governments, such as in Singapore and in Israel, that happens. So we need more political will and more push on the government front to really make that happen. So that's on the regulation. Now regarding kosher and halal, so we got a kosher ruling recently. We're currently working on the actual certificate. Part of the collaboration we have with Esco in Singapore is to work on the halal certification. We expect the plant we're building together to be the first halal certified plant for growing cells globally. Which will be interesting, and there is no reason why we couldn't be halal as well, and we recognize the importance of halal certification for Southeast Asia and for the Middle East as well. Israel is part of the Middle East, working closely with the UAE and the Middle East North African region. So that goes without saying.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. I think we actually got 10 minutes less than I was expecting, so I'm skipping on the talent because Eugene already spoke a little bit about that. But what about consumer acceptance? Yulene, do you have any brilliant ideas of how to get the consumer on board?
I think that also starts with you. I think we were talking a little bit with the Good Food Institute, not just about helping consumers understand that, but Meta alluded to the fact that not many people have actually tasted cultivated meat, despite all the news around it in Singapore. So I wonder, it would be a good census to know whether people are interested to try it, and after they try it, whether they'll come back for it. And I think some of the work that the Good Food Institute has been doing around risk communication, building up a educated retailer, distributor, and just ecosystem, right? It's not just breaking down a brick wall of regulation, but whether or not the market is ready to sell these products, to market them correctly, and also to store, use them, and accept them into their daily routines. So I think a lot of the things that we do at Nurasa, one of it is having a food tech innovation center. The food tech innovation center is a food grade facility. So if a cultivated meat company moves in and starts their pilot production there, if they get dossier approval with SFA, they're actually allowed to host tastings. And we're starting to see a few requests for novel food exemption tasting, so even before you get full approval. And I think the response there has always been of excitement, right? Because it's always something that someone's never tasted before. But I think I look forward to moving beyond that and moving beyond just feeling like you've been invited to a very exclusive dinner, but also to feel like this is a very normal thing.
Yeah, so at the Good Food Institute, we really believe that it is time for the industry to get together and share a narrative and really try to make sure that the consumers are ready for these products, even though they're not on the market yet. By using the same nomenclature when we're talking about these novel foods, to share how, like, be transparent, be honest with the consumers about what this is, and like make it a little bit less scary for people. So there is an initiative that we're supporting, and Andrew, please raise your hand because Andrew Powell there is leading this. It's called CLIF, Communication Leadership in Future Food. We're still looking for a couple of partners to actually support the launch of this initiative. I think it's very timely, very important that we de-risk consumer acceptance of novel foods. We have very few minutes left. So first, let me open up. Let me see if there's any question, just one question maybe, from the audience. Yeah? Go, Andrew.
Yeah, hi. We were talking about nomenclature there. And Didier, you're talking cellular meat. We're talking cultivated meat in Southeast Asia. Can you give us your thinking on cultivated v cellular? Because we're having discussions about alternative proteins, complementary proteins in the plant-based space as well. So could you just give us a bit of insight into that yourself?
Yes, of course. So first, we consider cells as a new source of animal food beside meat and milk. And the idea is really to optimize the system as a whole for making it sustainable, improving animal welfare, improving the quality of the products. So we do see cells as complementary to sustainably raised animals and more extensive, less animals, better managed. So that's one. Second, in terms of first product, which is in the space of cultivated meat, we do see it as a first application of cells. We're working on a range of different platforms. We published recently, 2 years ago already, our platform for making collagen, which is the basis for a range of products in the food, medical, pharmaceutical, even leather applications. And we have other products based on our cells in the pipeline. So we really do see cells as the platform, and then a range of different products, cultivated meat being one of those. We use cultivated as a terminology, but we might need to adapt it according to each country, based on consumer surveys. JFI has performed quite a few.
I think that makes sense. So to round off this panel, I'm going to ask all of you to commit to one action in the next 12 months to advance the novel foods market forward. So I'm not asking you to solve the scaling up challenge in the next 12 months, but one step towards that. And I'm going to check in with you next year to see if you kept your promise, and I'll give you bonus points if you call for collaborations. So Miguel, I'll start with you. What are you going to do?
Aside of investing, I'm doing this little newsletter called Future Food Now, and I'm going to actually write a specific piece on scale-up, and what is available for companies in the region right now, what are kind of collaborations are also open for, with likes of Nurasa and GFI, and resources and financing beyond the VCs, the less obvious stuff. And I want to make it, obviously, as an available resource for all the entrepreneurs and founders in the region.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to that. DJ?
Yes, following the first approvals we expect to get soon, we intend to file in few additional countries, including in Southeast Asia. And I think our main target for the next 12 months is to promote more collaboration and harmonization on the regulatory side.
Very happy to collaborate with you on that. Eugene?
Yep. So I don't know if you guys agree. I think health is actually the #1 driver for the alternative protein. So promoting health really should be our job, our responsibility, because quite frankly, it's not sustainability. It's not animal mercy. It really is about healthy. If we can make our foods healthier, even though it's a bit more expensive, people still will be willing to buy. And that's what we should do.
Thanks. Jolene?
So a new pet project is really after a few conversations with the Singapore Food Agency. We learned that the Singapore Food Agency is overwhelmed with questions and of course dossiers. They reached out for partners to be associate consultants for companies trying to go through the novel food process. They host open clinics for different companies who wish to find out more about how to complete their dossier, questions they might be asking. So that's something I'm hoping that I'm doing for Nurasa, which is that there will be a small group that can objectively, and with respect to all confidentiality of the technology that these companies have, to actually see if we can provide some of these services to harmonize regulation.
Thank you very much. All amazing initiatives, and I'm very much looking forward to the future of food. So please, a warm applause for the expert panel, and thanks for listening in.
Yeah, thank you so much to everyone, especially Myrte for moderating that fascinating panel discussion. Now it's time for another coffee break. It is going to be a very quick one because we are running a little bit behind. So 15 minutes, listen out for the bell. Remember, if you're of my generation, when you're at school, the bell was the signal for the next class. So we'll see you all back in here in 15 minutes. bell's going, so if everyone could come in and be seated, we'd really appreciate it. Just a couple more sessions. Welcome back, everyone, for the last couple of sessions of the day. Next, we're going to be looking at new trends, what's next for plant-based foods. And there's a lot of ground to cover here, so without further ado, I'll hand over to our expert speakers. Welcome to Matilda Ho of Bits and Bites, Alex Ward of Next Gen Foods, Martin Guritz of Thai Union, and moderating this panel we have Adrian Desbiets of Salad Stop. Welcome, everyone.
All right, hope that everybody got their coffee fix and is ready for the last part of the afternoon. So for today's panel, we'll focus a little bit more on the customer and especially the future of plant-based foods. Us at Salad Stop, I guess we work a lot in this space. We've experimented with a lot of products, including Tyndall. And I guess we operate in 7 markets, so we've seen the different customers' perceptions and how they think of plant-based foods. The industry obviously is going through its own journey. We all, I guess, are trying to see what the customer is looking for. You know, are they looking for a meaty texture? Is it sustainability? Is it health? What is the product going to look like in the next 10 to 20 years? So today we've got 3 very interesting companies. I guess will all give us a different perspective. Matilda from Bits and Bites, so early stage VC. Tyndall, sort of a young company looking to push on the chicken space, I guess. And Martin from Thai Union, a big seafood producer here in Thailand, also moving into plant-based. So maybe starting with you, Alex. Maybe you can give us a little bit of a sense of Tyndall, the beginnings, you know, what was the original thesis, and how has that evolved?
Okay, sure. So Next Gen Foods, Tyndall, set up like 3 years ago in Singapore. And the company strategy was to have sort of 2 layers. One is an IP layer where we do food ingredient design and food product design. The second platform around branding and communication. And the third around building business networks that enable us to work with partners to scale and distribute globally. So that strategy hasn't changed. That stands true. So Tyndall's the first brand. And we've launched that in Singapore, and we've taken that around the world using external partners. We've just put our second brand into this platform, which is Moi, which is a plant-based dairy brand, and we're launching that with gelato in the UK at the moment. And then the sort of more operational layer, so that's the IP layer, the operational layer is working with partners to scale that. And that's where we have changed a little bit on the strategy. So to begin with, it was launching in Asia and then actually coming to China was the original plan to build this business in Asia. We decided not to do that because we felt as though in order to show traction as quickly as we wanted to and we needed to, that the more developed markets in Western Europe and the US were the right place to go to start. So we started in food service. We launched in around 2,000 restaurants around the world. And then rather than moving east into China, we accelerated our move into retail. So we developed a whole new range of products in addition to our food service range that enabled us to go into supermarkets. And so that started in Germany with a deal. Luckily, having a co-founder who's already launched a brand and built it in retail in Germany was a huge advantage. Getting those initial meetings in the retailers was easy. Closing the deals was not easy, but we've managed to do it. And we now have access to about 6,000 supermarkets in Germany. And that's really providing now with a lot of opportunity to grow.
Can you maybe also give us some insights in terms of you started off at restaurants, then went into retail, supermarkets. Maybe explain to us the strategies behind that and the shift.
Sure. We decided that convincing chefs to use the product and cook with it, put it on their menu, and by doing that, put their name to it, was the right way to build the credibility for the product and the visibility for the brand. And it was the right thing to do. That helped us launch around the world successfully and build that awareness for Tyndall. And then when people go into the supermarket, hopefully they're aware of the product already. They might have even tried it in a restaurant. And that behavior of seeing it on the shelf, putting it into the basket, that might be made a little bit easier because the awareness and the trial maybe has already taken place.
And what has been the adoption now that you've seen, I guess, in Europe or the US?
The reality of the German market is that it's very price sensitive. Food is low cost. We heard earlier, food is low cost. And it's taken us a couple of iterations of pricing strategy to get it right, based on real-time data. I mean, supermarkets, once you're in, it's hard to get in, but once you're in, it's very easy to get kicked out if the velocity of the product doesn't remain, right? So you get measured by the number of units sold per store per week. And if you go in with an idealistic view on pricing, and that velocity is not there, then you can be removed from the shelf. And once you're out, it's very, very hard to get back in again. So a couple of iterations on pricing strategy. We're now at a level where the product is moving off the shelf, which is fantastic. We're finding that once people actually try the product, then the repeat purchase is starting to be very promising. So the learning is get the pricing right, but accept that it might hit you on your bottom line in the short term, but it's something that is necessary to do at this point in time when everybody's a little bit watching their pennies.
Matilda, you invested, I guess, in this space very early on, and especially in China. How do you see the landscape now in China, and I guess maybe the rest of Southeast Asia, particularly from a VC standpoint, as I guess things have dried up and a lot of the bigger players, their sales have plateaued. So what's the sentiment like, and also the adoption in a place like China?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Matilda from Bits and Bytes. Just a little bit background of ourselves. We're a China market investor, and we look into the early stage agri-food tech investments. And obviously, alternative protein is a big sector of our investment. So we actually have 5 portfolio companies, 2 in China, 1 in Singapore, and 2 in Israel. And I would say that in 2021, this whole sector is really, really popular, and we're able to attract a lot of the crossover investors, even the TMT-based investors. And however, in the tech industry, we tend to have this growing at all cost mentality. So all the founders were actually, after receiving piles of money, were under a lot of pressure to grow rapidly, 100% YOY growth. Otherwise, you're perceived to be a very slow player. So all the money were raised, were under pressure to use as expensive marketing campaigns in China or even in other regions that we have observed to acquire new customer, new distribution channel instead of building a sustainable business model. So actually in 2023, we think that this is actually a very healthy reality check, readjustment for the founders, because now the attention to the profitability will become super important for the founders after several years of easy or free money, because the fundraising in this plant-based sector will only become more difficult moving forward. And I do believe this is the right time that we look at the fundamental, which is the product tasty and is the price reasonable? I think these are just two very simple equations to really drive innovation in this space. And in terms of your second question about the adoption, I would say that definitely dairy adoption is much, much faster than meat alternatives. I think in dairy space, as you know, I don't know how many of you have recently visited Shanghai. Almost every corner you hit a coffee shop, right? Now Shanghai is the #1 city in the world in terms of the coffee shop per capita. And now it's very, very competitive for the barista to attract those customers. So they don't want to serve usual latte, right? They want a very intensive menu of coconut latte or almond milk latte with TCM or postbiotics. So the dairy alternatives are really there to serve as an alternative, not as a replacement to the cow milk. So I think that's explained why this unique, very smart value proposition clicked with the Chinese consumers. But on the other side, the meat alternative is not very lucky. And we see almost every single brand come in and come out because the biggest competitor is tofu and mushrooms in Chinese. And even as a flexitarian like myself, I can easily cook tofu and mushroom-based dish with 30 days consecutively without repeating any dish. And they are tastier and much cheaper than all the existing options. So why bother to switch? So I think that will be very, very difficult in the near term.
Martin, you are sort of part of a very large established group in Thailand. How does plant-based fit in the group's overall strategy? And I've read that Thai Union has focused a lot on sustainability. So how does that tie into the plant-based space?
Thank you, Adrian. Yes, so Thai Union is on a bit of a journey with regards to a transformation, embarking on a lot of new innovations and new categories being launched, from ingredients to supplements to now also alternative proteins. Alternative proteins is very much part of the larger transformation of the group, but also, of course, contributing to our sustainability efforts. But more importantly is we believe, and maybe I should actually say believed, because it is a few years ago that we started, that alternative proteins or plant-based solutions was a new growth opportunity for the group. Now, indeed, to the comments that were just made, today that is a little bit of a harder sell internally because the category is actually not so much of a growth engine as we speak today. But having said that, there's a strong belief of the future of this category. The fundamentals are there. We need it in the longer term, but it's more of a marathon than it is really a sprint. Now, to your point on sustainability, and hooking back a little bit to the conversation just here on stage with Eugene, we don't pitch sustainability. People don't eat sustainability. They eat taste, aromas, flavors, and nutrition, but anything beyond that, it's not going to be eaten. We've done research in different markets. Yes, there are certain pockets where you see sustainability coming in, but we're really focused on, and yes, it's our first generation of products. We're really focusing on the aroma, the taste, the experience. That is what brings people back, because that is the biggest issue today. Novelty gets people to try, and that is valid for our products. It's valid for the cultivated discussions we just had. People queue up on the Thursday afternoon for a nugget that is cultivated, but are they going to come back next week and again and again and again? And that is what you see often with plant-based, is people have come in, they enjoyed it or not, and from an experience point of view, and then they walk away. And if we don't hold on to them, then you lose your sales, you lose your repeats, and then you're delisted from the store, and then we're back to square one.
So what I'm hearing is plant-based in Europe and US is gaining traction, not so much in China, I guess, for certain products. But what does the future hold in Asia then? Is the focus right now more on the more mature markets, and we wait and see, and that will develop over time in this part of the world, or do we need to adapt the product to something that's more tofu-like? How do you see that evolving, maybe to all three of you?
Okay, sorry. Let me comment. I've been working hard. So we talked about geographical expansion and channel expansion. Another one is the quick service restaurants. And I think in Asia, this is going to prove to be one of the low-hanging fruit to get real traction. And this is in the burger chains, in the quick service restaurants that rely on coated products and differentiation in taste and texture and crunch through the coatings that they have. And I think if you look at the big chains, the chicken chains and the burger chains, they all now have, and my focus is chicken, right? They have a chicken sandwich. And in order to entice more families in, because most people that go into these restaurants are actually individuals, in order to entice more families in, they need to have a wider range of products so that the family, everybody can eat what they want to eat. And when we find that we're talking to these sorts of companies, the conversation is about the aroma, the crunch, the seasoning of the coating, not necessarily the meat inside. Like the technology to make chicken meat from plants is there today, and it's good. And the ability to scale that is there today. In fact, there's plenty of capacity. We could make, we talk about small pieces of cultivated meat not being available after 10:30 on a Thursday. In Singapore, we can make probably 10 to 15,000 tons of plant-based meat a year with existing capacity today. So I think these quick service restaurants are going to provide a good avenue for revenue for these companies in the region. But we've just got to get this coating and this local taste right for each of those markets.
And just sorry to dive into that a bit more, would you say that that's a Tyndall patty, or is that OEM? Like, what's the importance from a brand standpoint, do you think, for QSRs?
Well, the importance from our perspective, from a brand, is definitely it's a Tyndall patty. If you look at, say, Burger King in Europe now, it's like plant-based Whopper, and there's a vegetarian butcher logo in the bottom of the screen, right? So that association is there, that brand recognition is there. Hopefully, if the companies can build a brand to the point where it's recognized and it adds value, then these can be branded products or co-branded products, as we have now in Little Farms, thank you very much, in Singapore. So I think that would be our preferred option, rather than a sort of white label OEM type product, because it has credibility.
Can I just add to that? So from my point of view, we are almost ready for a plant-based 2.0. To the point made earlier by Matilda, I think we need to relook at our propositions and how we sell it in the market. Today, the consumer is not buying into the category. We can try again and again and again with the same proposition. They're not going to buy into the category. We need to revisit a little bit what we do. And I feel we need to move away from mimicking the chicken, the pork, the beef, the tuna, into new solutions. And that could be new, if I speak of seafood, new seafood experiences. Experiences that don't necessarily mimic crab or tuna, but create a new seafood experience. And how can we embed more seafoodness within our propositions? And again, how can we leverage, in our case, algae, seaweed, to bring that experience to life? It needs to be an enjoyable food moment that you're going to have alone or with your family, outside or at home. And if that is really meant to be another chicken, I don't think so. Because then also you take away the whole comparison debate that we have today, right? And it just needs to be an enjoyable experience. So I believe we will revisit and see a new category evolve. And that will include, by the way, hybrids of cultivated and fungi and whatever else you might imagine.
We'll get into the product innovation side a little bit later, but just to go back to the consumer and what you see, especially through maybe some of the portfolio companies that you've invested in, where's the consumer going? What are they looking for in Asia again?
Yeah, I would say, the whole plant-based is still such a young industry, and we have come a long way from the monk meat to the vegan burger, the bean-based burger, to Beyond, and then to Impossible with amazing heme ingredient, and then to all these 2.0 players. But we still have a lot longer way to go to really hitting the tipping points. First, the products still need to be much, much better from all the existing 1.0, and then the costs need to continue to drop. Regulation needs to continue to be more open-minded and open up and remove more barriers, especially some of the EU countries. And then lastly, the commercial and the commercialization and scale out also take time to build. And especially from the price parity part, we do think that China can provide the enormous opportunity to bring the cost down. If you look at the raw material, actually nearly 2/3 of those raw materials are currently sourced from China. And even just in Shandong province alone, there are several hundreds of food processing facilities that has been around for nearly 2 decades with a very mature food supply chain that will be able to bring the final cost down. And one of our portfolio company in Beijing called X Meats, they're definitely taking this inherent advantages, building all these whole cut, affordable solution, leveraging the HME processing technology from Shandong, and then not selling to Chinese market, but sell it to Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, the UK, where we see a very strong demand on the shelf.
So to zoom into the price parity, how much do you see, especially maybe for you, Alex, in terms of the price sensitivity? You mentioned in Germany, people are quite price sensitive. Is the goal is to ultimately get to a comparable cost to the meat alternative, or do you see that there's a premiumness that can be attached to it, health, sustainability, again, all that?
I think you have to be very realistic market by market. So Germany is very price sensitive, and actually the consumer sets the price. We tried setting the price. Honestly, it didn't work. Consumer sets the price, and that means that the price at which point they'll actually put it in their basket. And then you reverse engineer your profitability based on that. When we're talking to sort of, in Southeast Asia specifically, big catering companies, maybe who then, the idea is that they could then influence institutions or schools, and this is happening a lot in the Western markets. We talked about this mayor of New York is now pushing this as a result of the Vegan Women's Summit recently into schools in New York State. But talking to these catering companies, they buy chicken at less than $3 a kilo today. And if we're going in saying, well, actually, maybe you should use something that's, let's say, for argument's sake, $10 a kilo, they're not going to do it unless somebody is telling them, their customers saying, actually, we want you to have more plant-based on your menu. And maybe there's an incentive or something towards doing that. So I think there's a big struggle at this point in time in this part of the world. But chickens are scaled, bigger picture, chickens are scaled as it could ever possibly be. You can't make chicken cheaper and faster than you do today. So with all of the input costs going up, chicken is going to increase in price, and plant-based chicken hasn't been scaled at all yet. So if we're already able to sell today, and as we scale, that price will come down, eventually we'll be cheaper. Maybe not cheaper than the $3 per kilo, but you never know, maybe we will be.
So for you, Martin, what sort of areas are you looking at in terms of product innovation? You mentioned algae.
Yeah, so we obviously, the challenge in seafood is somewhat different in the sense that you have got 200 plus different species of seafood versus one chicken. And all of them have different flavors, different textures, different aromas. So the world is very different and complex. Now, obviously, we're not going to do all 200, so we focus on a shorter list. But we want to embed more sea plants in our portfolio. So using algae, using seaweed, using ingredients from the sea to bring new seafood experiences. Now, we have the capability to do more than just tuna and shrimp, and for those of you who have tasted outside, we also are a strong believer of using it in application. So instead of trying to sell what we call a naked shrimp, it'll be a very hard sell because everybody's comparing it versus the original in price, in texture, so that comparison you have got straight in your face. The moment we come with wonton, spring rolls, and we are able to deliver a seafood-like experience, but with all of these creations, I think our life is actually becoming a whole lot easier. So we are banking on some of these new developments, and then, of course, with new species to bring new things to life. But eventually, I think we'll create call it new species, a green fish that tastes great, tastes like seafood, you just cannot put a name to it. Now that is a harder marketing story, but possibly technically an easier thing to do because I no longer need to mimic something that exists.
I mean, I think it's a similar experience, I guess, that we've had with, with you, Alex, in terms of Good Food People, an online retail brand that we launched in Singapore and then recently in Little Farms in a supermarket in Singapore, and trying to value add to this space from taking a simple product and trying to make it user-friendly for someone at home. So if it's a ready-to-heat meal, it's just something that's familiar to them. It could be in a curry format, it could be a tindal katsu that we did, and trying to just break that barrier, because I think that was what we found very often is people tried it in a restaurant, but then how they translate it at home, the product doesn't cook like chicken, it doesn't necessarily taste exactly the same way. So doing that at home was at least the value add that we brought, maybe from being quite close to the consumer. For you, Matilda, when you think about that sort of price parity and maybe a little bit more downstream and some of the challenges in terms of closing that pricing gap, where do you see the opportunities?
I think for the future of the plant-based, it needs to be a hybrid version. I think a lot of the industry put a lot of segmentation, right? What is the plant-based growth? What's the microbial-based protein growth? What is the cell culture meat? But actually, by the end of the day, for the first generation of cell culture meat in the market, it will be a hybrid model. So we think that, to reach that taste parity and price parity, we need to put everything together. So that's how we predict that in the future, when there's a product that still could be the soy protein as the base raw material and the wheat protein, and then we can coat it with the culture fat or a synthetic fat that can also better integrate with the protein very well to create a sensory experience. And I also like to say the day that the plant-based can become mainstream is the day that we abandon this word. This word plant-based in China is literally called man-made meat. It just sounds really, really really disgusting in my opinion, and so everyone is like, why am I paying premium for a man-made meat? Sorry to advertise this, but I just tried the Tindal's new version of the chicken, and it's a unflavored chicken chunks, and that was the first time after tasting for hundreds of brands, the first time I couldn't tell that's not a real chicken. And that was the day I thought, if this is putting on the shelf in the restaurant, you don't need to even tell consumer this is not chicken, And that's the day I think it will hit the mainstream.
Alex, maybe just for the benefit of the audience, can you explain? I guess it's True Cut, right? Then you maybe the technology and I guess what the advancements in the product have been.
Yeah, so we've made strong advancements on the product quality in terms of texture, taste, and nutrition, and ingredient listing. So what Matilda tasted the other day is our new chicken chunks that we manufacture in Singapore. We've actually just shipped the first container of chicken from Singapore to Europe. I think this is a first. It's never happened before. We've got customers lined up in Europe, actually salad bars. So this is an amazing product that replicates very closely the texture and the taste of chicken. And importantly, it holds its texture as it cools down. So you can have it there in a salad bar and use it throughout the day. We then use that as the building block for what we've now just recently launched called True Cut, which is a whole muscle piece of chicken. And that is getting a lot of attention from these global QSRs, because for the first time, it gives a product eating experience, especially when it's coated in their coating. We're not trying to replicate KFC's secret 11 herbs and spices. We can get quite close, but we're not trying to do that. We'd rather use their coating. And you put that chicken patty into a chicken sandwich, and it stands up against the animal product. And that truly is something which we can be proud of. And that will get people trying it again and again and again, especially with these families that are coming into these restaurants. So I think we're making really strong progress on product from a taste, texture, and nutrition point of view. And we're just getting started. We're centralizing all of this R&D in Singapore and taking it around the world.
I think, Martin, just to maybe get back into, I guess, the potential convergence of cell-based, plant-based, natural forms of, a mushroom patty. How do you see that? Because I know you've invested, or your R&D space, has included cell-based. How do you see that coming together?
I don't have a glass bowl, but I foresee there will be a lot of use of hybrids, as was earlier indicated. So yeah, I think leveraging the right technology for the right proposition. To give you an example, we can make a perfectly fine tuna today with relatively cheap technologies, and that delivers perfectly fine if you use it on a sandwich with mayonnaise and lettuce and a tomato, and you would not see the difference. But if I put it on a salad and on top, and it is very visible, then we would actually need a new technology. So I think it also depends on the application. If you want to put a tuna on a pizza, again, at 300 degrees Celsius, it will have a different effect. So we really need to understand what is the application, what is the use, how are you going to use that, and then work our way back. And then, so yeah, the world is your oyster, depending on the needs and the requirements and the price propositions. But a hybrid I foresee as a logical step.
That very much translates, I guess, in our business as well. I think when we tried the first generation of Tyndall, served cold, it didn't necessarily hold the same way. But the new version, I think, has just a very different profile. And I think that's what's fascinating with the space right now, is that I guess we're hearing a lot from customers trying to adapt to their needs, but at the same time trying not to cover all the bases. And that's where I guess this space is going to go through quite a bit of an evolution over the next few years. I'm very conscious of time. I think we literally have a minute left. So maybe we can ask for any questions for the panel members.
Thank you for a fascinating conversation. I definitely classify myself as your target audience. I'm an urban omnivore that wants to reduce my meat consumption for many reasons. But in my day job, I'm hearing lots of alarm bells ringing by climate scientists and sort of the FAO, Chief Scientific Officer, to say, are we blindly moving into another environmental crisis? Who do you think is responsible for doing the macro modeling of where all of these new plant ingredients are going to be grown and produced? I think many of us that walked through the 90s saw that remarkable transition from trans fats to palm oil. And palm oil was this amazing solution, and still is, to a non-plant alternative that was damaging health. But the lack of foresight and macro modeling of where palm oil would be grown and the scale that it would be grown and how quickly it would be scaled up left us fighting decades of crisis in an environmental context. Who's responsible of stopping that happening with the plant-based evolution? And is hybrids and precision fermentation and cell culture going to balance that off in the future?
It's a big question.
Well, maybe my 2 cents on this is, partially you gave the answer with regards to maybe the balance with new technologies. But rest assured, on the sales that we do today, you have nothing to worry about. Now, that is also the sad part. That's the sad part. Now, we want to stay optimistic. I think you were the one who mentioned that you were, what was the quote? You impatiently optimistic. Yeah, so I think all of us are also very impatient, and yet also still very optimistic. We want to make this happen. Now, who is going to tackle this? I think that, again, comes back also to conversation you had early on stage with regards to partnerships. There is not a single institution or entity that can do this together. And that needs to happen at country level, at regional level. I think, these conversations need to be had. But we have time, because at the rate at which it's going, we have time.
Just to be on that, I think, if we look at the current food system, among the top 18 food and beverage company, nearly 85% of their food and beverage products are classed as unhealthy according to WHO. So I think there are many, many intertwined challenges that we're facing right now. And, people are fed by the food industry who pay no attention to health, and healed by the healthcare industry who pay no attention to food. But food should be the doctor's first prescription, and I think this is also the root cause of why we're facing all these challenges, from the healthcare issues to the sustainability issue to the resilient issue, and we need to take a more integrated and a collaborative approach, and I think that's why we're all here together today.
We all know, like with soy in particular, 80, maybe 85%, maybe even more of it is grown and fed to animals. As the demand for meat increases, especially in developing markets, and population increases, the need for more and more meat is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. But it's a finite resource. We can't make more the way that we make it today. If we can address that incremental need for meat by making, say, the soy more efficient, make it work harder to transfer from a plant protein into a consumable protein, then we don't need to grow more than we have today. We grow enough. We just need to use it more smartly. And rather than feeding it to cows and pigs to then convert inefficiently into a protein that we as humans consume, we can take the soy and we can convert it directly into meat. And we can address all of those needs. So actually, I think the net will be able to give land back rather than need more. And to your second point about the cultured space, I'm a big believer in this. I love what especially the cultured fat is going to do for the plant-based industry over time. It's going to give more flavor. Fat is taste. It doesn't need to be texturized like some other cultured meat products need to be done. It can come out as it does from the bioreactors. We can make it taste like chicken relatively easily. And we can build hybrid products that really deliver on that succulence that people love and crave about meat. So I think we're just getting started. But I definitely don't think we need more land to grow crops.
So on that positive note, I guess there's a lot in terms of the fundamentals. Like you said, Alex, I guess there's we're all at that maybe pause button today, where the funding has slowed down, but at the same time we have to sort of understand what the customer is actually looking for, and different customers will be looking for different options. But it's a very exciting space. We all believe in it. There's hope. So thank you all, and thank you to the panel members for a very insightful talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we are at the final panel. We're going to take a glimpse into the future, 2030, what beholds us in the agri-food predictions. So welcoming on the panel, Adam from Padang, Patrick Visoni from Franklin Templeton, Siraj Chaudhry from SATS and Tata Group, and moderating the panel, Joshua Su from Grow. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Final panel, but where we look into the future. A very exciting topic about the crystal balling, about what our sector will look like. So before I begin, and I sort of break down how we would be approaching today's panel, I think it'll be worth having a quick introduction so that you know at least where we're coming from when we share our perspective. So maybe Adam, if you'd like to give an intro.
Okay, very quickly. I see the clock is less than we thought. Okay, Padang, Innovation Catalyst, 10 years in Singapore. We're all about working with large corporations and government organizations to help them drive their innovation agendas to deliver sustainable growth. And we do that by matching them with startups, scale-ups through a variety of platforms and challenges and different programs. For instance, with Grow Asia, back in 2018, we did the first Pan-Asia Agri-Tech Accelerator out of Singapore. So we've been involved in a whole range of activities. I'm a climate guy in the sense that I did the Al Gore climate training 10 years ago, fun fact, in Istanbul over the weekend of the Taksim riots, and I managed to get tear gas 3 times in 24 hours. So that's sort of my climate badge, and so I've sort of held that for a long time. Big believer in soil and the oceans, which I think is great the way that's been coming up a lot today, and we'll hear perhaps some more about that.
Patrick.
Thank you. Patrick Zonian with Franklin Templeton. We are one of the world's largest fund managers with about 1.5 trillion under management. Of that, about 260 billion in alternative investments, which makes us one of the top 10 globally. We're the #1 secondaries, private secondary manager, particularly for privates. And my role is I head agri-food and impact investing globally. Yep.
Fantastic, thanks. And Siraj?
I am Siraj Chaudhry. I presently work for SATS, which is a company based out of Singapore, engaged in feeding and connecting people. I lead their India operations as their country chairman. But prior to SATS, I was with Cargill for about 25 years and for a long period led Cargill in India. Long association with food and agriculture. I must say there's something very unique about this panel. I mean, we are all men. I think the only panel which doesn't have a woman.
Why'd you mention
that? and going by the experience, all old men, relatively.
Why did you mention that?
For yourself.
Getting to the relaxed part of the afternoon,
unfortunately. And we've been called upon here to predict the future.
I wonder what that future is going to look like.
It's coming fast.
Josh, you've got something on your hands today.
Yes, I do have hands. Yes, so we're from India, Hong Kong, Singapore, myself, Singapore as well. But the things that we work is global. So hopefully we can give a sense of what it is looking like globally, but bring it down into Asia. All right. So objective of today, give you some food for thought in terms of what 2030 might look like. The way I'll break down today's panel, I'll do it in 2 halves. So, I mean, blue sky thinking, great, but I'd like to ground it in some, consumer needs and wants. So the first half, we're going to look at, okay, what are some of the drivers and the drivers driving this change? And I'd like to look at from downstream, midstream, and upstream, and also look at innovators and investors and disruptors. Secondly, we're going to talk about 3 things. So we're going to talk about how is the food system going to benefit the consumers, in particular health and nutrition. Then we're going to look back into protein, which was how we're revolutionizing our food system. And lastly, back to the farmers and climate. So impact and sustainability, how we actually food system to drive benefit to planet and also the people connected to the land. So let's begin. In terms of changes happening downstream, I always get this wrong. So Siraj, maybe you would like to kick us off. What are the changes that you're seeing and what's becoming more apparent?
Thanks, Joshua. Changes are, in the food system or the ag system are directly linked with how the society is evolving. We live in a part of the world which is seeing rapid urbanization. And, 50% of the world's urban population, is living in this part of the world. Within that, 75% of the urban population lives in India, Indonesia, and China. Now, urbanization obviously has a huge impact on food because that brings in a large variety in diets. It has an impact on how food is consumed, which is convenience becomes an important factor. And third is that it does create challenges on land usage. So that's a government's problem. I don't think it's the industry's problem to begin with. But I think what that is doing, it is actually creating 2 levels of, we talk about consumers, but there's not one consumer. We live in a world where there is actually 2 sets of consumers. There is one consumer who is undernourished, needs nutrition, and there is another set of consumers we are talking about overnourished or, even the challenge of obesity in certain parts and the associated health disadvantages. So the challenges are fairly different here. Companies are involved in addressing both. I have personally been fortunate to be associated with 2 organizations which actually are in India, actually the pioneers for food fortification, both for salt and edible oil. And at the same time, we are now in a situation where as we urbanize, there's greater need for convenience food. I've shared this with you earlier that when I look at how the role of women in the society in a country like India, in my generation, I would say my grandmother probably spent about 6 hours a day in the kitchen. My mother probably 4 hours. My wife spends probably 1 hour, and my daughter may not spend any time in the kitchen. And therefore, the food as it is consumed will have to change. And the way it comes into homes or where it comes from will require that change. And I think all of us here are trying to address that. Now, the other thing that I've noticed is that, we have been paying the world, the I would say, the industry to create the problem, and now we're looking to pay them to solve the problem. So when we talked about convenience food, it was a lot about increased snacking. You know, we come from a time, some of us in the older generation probably grew up with the concept of 3 meals a day. Today, when we talk about consumption occasions, we actually have probably 6 consumption occasions in a day. I mean, there's the morning tea with some snack, there's breakfast, there is an early midday kind of snack, there's lunch, there's an evening snack, there's dinner, and there is an after-dinner drink or a snack, right? So the consumption occasions have increased, which means more food is required, and we are therefore creating more snacks and a larger snacking industry, which then has an implication on health, and we are now trying to solve the health problem. So, so the changes are really being, needed to create problems and then to solve them.
Adam, what are you seeing?
Well, I think we, in the last panel, there was quite a lot of talk about consumers. And picking up on that point, I think we have to think about today's consumers, even in the 2 categories you're talking about, and tomorrow's consumers. All of you who have children, or dare I say even grandchildren, what are they thinking? What are they going to be like? If we're sort of focusing on 2030, what are their values? What are their interests today? If they're 15 at the moment, what are they going to be doing when they're 22? Or if they're 20 today, 27, when they're starting to purchase more? Yes, we are constantly told that the young people, unlike baby boomers, care more about the environment. I don't actually accept that. I think baby boomers are pretty good on the environment. But there's certainly keenness about it. And let's see when they're starting to make more purchase decisions, because they were already sort of tugging and asking for things. I think if you do actually, as I said to Renoir before, that we've actually got to look at TikTok. What's being focused on TikTok? We need to look at the channels to market that are being used. We may not all be using them, but that's where messaging is getting out. And we've heard in the last couple of panels, if we are wanting to drive greater use of plant-based, how do we get the message out? We've just opened with Singapore's MRT operator an innovation hub downtown in a railway station, in an MRT station. And we're running different sampling programs right at the pointy end so commuters can come and try different products. And I think that's the way we're starting sort of to test things. Yes, there are differences, but we have to segment. We can't just keep doing everything's aggregated and averaged. I think we've got to focus on different markets and who wants what.
Okay, thanks a lot. So that's a little bit on the downstream. Maybe going up to the midstream and upstream. Start with you, Patrick. Weigh in on what's happening, what you're seeing is happening more towards that side of the sector.
Maybe, maybe from an investor lens, I guess. So there's been a marked shift in how investors are approaching investing in this space. We've had a marked change in the rates environment after what's been nearly 15 years of quantitative easing and this grand experiment, which has reversed. The Fed balance sheet went from $4 billion to $9 billion and has just started retreating, but we're only at the very beginning of that. So if we look forward, at least for the next few years, that's going to be a trend that's going to continue. And then when you look at the overall environment as well, you've got greater uncertainty. So you've got market volatility, you've got geopolitical issues, the impact of COVID, so on and so forth. So from an investor standpoint, one of the big changes, and we've heard this today, is that investors increasingly are starting with the market. Investors are starting with the consumer, and the technology really is table stakes. So that gives you the right to play. And so I think that's been a really big change in the way investors are viewing things. So the other thing I would say is because of all of that, if you look forward over the next, say, 5 years, so look back to the past 15 years, and power has really been in the hands of innovators and people. With this change, that pendulum is swinging back to capital having more power at the end of the day and more balance. And so, we've really had a generation of founders and entrepreneurs that have grown up in an environment that has changed. And I think as long as inflation's around and as long as uncertainty is around, you're going to see more of what you see today into the future. Yep.
Thanks for that. Maybe Siraj, your view on what's happening midstream and upstream.
So I'll talk about what SATS is doing in India, and which actually comes into the midstream. Our USP is really variety, and it's about variety in terms of how we produce food, which is the technology, frozen, extended chill, ambient. It's about variety in packaging, and packaging is going to play a very important role as supply chains extend. The whole sustainability story around recycling of packaging material is going to get bigger, and we are very seriously invested in that. And finally, it's about variety in cuisine, because as we go global and as consumers become more demanding, the ability to produce variety in the cuisines is going to be important. And SATS is into those spaces where we are setting up large kitchen facilities, which will reduce the need for, and which will have the ability to supply food, which will mean with long shelf life to QSRs, to customers, and that will actually reduce the need to have multiple kitchens all over the place. So there's energy saving, there is food wastage control, and because there's technology involved, there are better processes, bulk procurement, bulk production, so reducing the cost of food. And that is, when I talked about people not having enough time to cook and, the whole convenience food, so it is taking the focus away from snacks and saying that, okay, how can we get good to eat, good tasting, nourishing food into the homes of people through the QSR chains, and that's one space that we are seeing ourselves as making a contribution to.
Thanks for that. So now we've seen the end-to-end, I guess maybe from an investor and disruptor perspective. Patrick, was there anything else you wanted to add? I know you mentioned that a few things from the investor psyche. Have you seen much change in the last 3 to 5 years, and what's going to change in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, in particular in terms of where the investment flows are going. So further to what I mentioned before, we saw an explosion up until a couple of years ago in downstream, and particularly most of that really focused on e-commerce in Asia. And what we're seeing now as a consequence of, say, government policy in China or otherwise, is a migration upstream. That also makes sense in terms of commodity cycles. So when you see a commodity upswing, generally speaking, value migrates upstream. And so that's I think one of the most marked things we're seeing. So basically capital flowing upstream into either production or food processing.
Okay, interesting. And Adam, what all the work that you're doing in open innovation, what kind of solutions are you seeing coming out from Asia?
Well, I think it's not just Asia. I think it's pretty global in terms of when we're looking at open innovation collaboration around waste. With SATS last year, did a program there. A circular economy, I know Taiwan was involved in a challenge last year, that we're seeing lots of these sorts of challenges. Anything to do with sustainability, we're seeing many programs come up around that. And it's not this fixation on disruption. I think it's actually beyond disruption, because in a sense, disruption is kind of a finite market. You're trying to attack an existing market. This is more sort of outside existing markets, building new markets, anything to do with the green economy. For instance, Singapore and Australian Prime Ministers are meeting in Singapore this week. They've signed a green economy agreement. There's going to be new announcements between countries. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that type of activity coming through to the fore.
All right. So now I'd like to shift gears a bit to the second half, where we're going to take some of these perspectives that the panelists have shared and then dive into 3 areas. So the first one is, how is the food system going to benefit the consumer? In particular, I want to look at nutrition and health. So Siraj, you mentioned that we can basically eat, now the consumers are looking to eat anywhere, anytime, however they want. So convenience is a big thing. So how do we marry this where, there's an increasing interest in eating healthy as well? Is this correlated?
Yes, I think there is a part of the population, and that number is growing as Adam mentioned, that the new generation is very conscious, is gradually getting more conscious about what they're eating. But I think the greater story is going to be where the interest in where their food is coming from and its impact on the environment. And I think that is a good change, where the consumer starts asking questions about the origin of food, the impact it has on the environment. It's gradual. We're coming from a place where people don't have enough to eat. to a point where people are beginning to question the food that's coming to them. And the companies which are supplying food will have to stand up to answer a lot of those questions, which will call for more transparency. And, the good news is that there is this awareness. People are, every large company that I know of has taken cognizance of this need for consumer, as well as the governments. I mean, I've recently read articles in India where the government has come down heavily on companies who are trying to do greenwashing. The consumers are not getting taken in by, just the lip service to causes. So I think food suppliers will be made more accountable for what they are supplying to the population, and I think that's good. Another issue which I think was touched upon and hasn't really got as much attention at the sort of industry level is this whole situation with water. Because I think I come from India, where we are largest producers of rice and sugarcane, which are water-guzzling crops, and India actually exports rice and sugarcane, which there we say that, we're actually exporting free water. And this is leading to the water tables going down. And I think, we've heard enough about future wars being about water. I think that is another awareness that consumer needs to get, because till they start asking that question, just they're asking about emissions and, recycling waste and all that, the sort of industry will not probably get, or the governments will not probably get as much focus onto those issues.
Okay. Well, food systems, I mean, oops, I lost it. So food systems are designed to do exactly what we want them to do, and they feel a particular lifestyle. So Patrick, you share an interesting view where, you said the green revolution has saved a lot of lives, but now it's taking a lot of lives. Do you want to maybe unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Two comments that were made earlier on today. One by Renfar saying that we can learn from mature markets like Europe and the US. There are some good lessons and there are some bad lessons there. And then I thought Matilda's comment in the previous forum was right on the mark. So you think about the post-World War II food security system, which was built on shelf-stable, fortified, calorie-dense food. That helped save a lot of lives and help population growth. It's now essentially what's making us sick, and in some cases, what's killing us. So the lesson that we can learn from the US is, think about this, $4 trillion spent on healthcare, 19% of GDP, $32,000 per family per year. 80% of that is because people eat the wrong stuff. And that's the unfortunate truth. And so we need a fundamental reboot of the food system. Now, I had the pleasure of attending the Biden conference on hunger, nutrition, and health, and seeing the policy-making frameworks within the US to try and address this. And unfortunately, there's gridlock. So the learning for Asia, and the learning in some respects for Europe as well, is really having the political will to be able to change that system. And it needs to be done soon. I mean, China has the world's largest diabetic population, 8.1% now. In 2030, will be 10%. Indonesia has 8% diabetic population as well. So we really need a fundamental rethink and a fundamental reboot of the food system. So what does that look like? Policy settings that changes the relative affordability of certain foods. So the fact that grains and oilseeds are so heavily subsidized and far more expensive than fruits and vegetables, which are good for you. And I think we're starting to see that with sugar taxes, ruminant taxes, so on and so forth. And I think government and the private sector really need to come together to make substantive changes, because every dollar that is spent on the food system now will be paid forward 3 or 4, a magnitude of, by an order of magnitude going forward.
I think just jumping on that, the way technology can support.
Yeah.
Now that we're starting to see Huawei and Apple will release a sort of glucose monitoring watch before too long. A lot of my friends are doing it at the moment, and so you can start to monitor the effect of what you're eating. Once it gets that close, so it's like counting your steps, which we all do on our iPhones, you can start to see in semi-real time the effect that the food is having on me. So after certain meals, you'll see, and you will see the facts. Not everyone's going to be influenced, but some people will. So I do see some real value coming up out of wearables and approach and how we combine that with our diet. I know we're short of time.
In addition to wearables and devices to manage and monitor, what else are investors seeing that could be very interesting in this space, Patrick?
So food is medicine, and is one area, and pardon me, produce prescriptions. Now, even given the, and I hate to use the US as an example, but the US really does influence the global food system. Even in the US, where the regulatory environment is very challenging, 6 states have already adopted produce prescriptions, and there are 4 states that's in trial at the moment. So if you go to a doctor and you have a problem, doctors are being trained to actually give you a prescription of fruits and vegetables to try and cure what ill to. And so that is something that, as investors, we're looking at how you can essentially support that. It's part of the reason why we're in impact investing as well. So we're at the confluence of doing well and doing good at the same time. Work in progress, but we're very, very focused on that. And we're focused on companies, particularly in growth capital, that are looking to make a lasting change in this space. And once again, it all has to start with the consumer at the end of the day. Yep.
Fantastic. So the second point I want to talk about is how are we revolutionizing the food system? So in this regard, protein. So we have an obsession of protein. Over the last 3 years, all proteins look to transform how we consume, produce, meet the stresses and opportunities in the food system. But we've heard it's now being challenged. So Patrick, Siraj, either one of you to start maybe, have we approached this right? Share your views.
Okay. You know, alternate proteins, and we've had a lot of conversations, you know, different geographies based on how their food sort of systems have evolved will take to it differently. I have a view on this on India. In India, where 25% of the population is vegetarian, 50% of people can afford meat once a week, and there are about 100 days in a year when people don't eat meat for religious reasons. Not like 100 running days, but different days. Now, in that scenario, alternate proteins is really not, you know, when there's not enough meat, what are you replacing? But there is need for protein. As these populations, when I was talking about, you know, urbanization, population moving, one of the need there is to have more protein. Now, India's been sort of meeting that need through a large pulses or lentils consumption. We are the world's one of the largest, or the largest pulses consumption. So there is an alternate protein to meat. So the opportunity I see for there is, and you know, someone talked about you know, having mushrooms and something, and could make 10, you know, for a month, make different recipes with it. So I see alternate proteins getting into that space. It is not going to be a vegetarian who's going to try something that tastes like meat. I mean, he doesn't know what meat tastes like, right? But for people who eat meat and cannot afford it, and therefore want to eat things which can taste like meat, will have a market, but that will mean pricing to be very different, and that is important. The other thing is that this change, India I don't think will be a great, barring a narrow sort of population which goes for dairy replacement for health reasons. India is not going to be a great supporter from a policy perspective of dairy replacer. I mean, we are the world's largest milk producers, and the government takes pride in our being that. Similarly, India has a large livestock population. The government wants to support that because that has a direct impact on the rural income. So this is a segment which is not going to find a lot of policy support. It has to be consumer pulled, and that will require really finding the right price point and the right products to find that consumer acceptance.
So I'm going to say something controversial. With respect to alternative protein, in particular precision fermentation cellular, I think we've got it more wrong than right. When you look at the amount of money that's been spent in this segment, and you look at the market penetration, I think we need a different approach. Now, look, so alternative protein has been put on the map. Some companies that have done some very innovative things. Alex, your presentation before was fantastic. But, you know, I saw too many companies that firstly fell in love with the technology instead of focusing on what consumers want, that tried to make an analog of Wagyu in order to justify a price point or unit economics and a high valuation. And there was a host of other issues as well, using agile techniques in food. Agile is great for software. It's not really good for food. You know, you can't do a version 0.8 for a whole bunch of reasons. And so what that has done, unfortunately, it has colored the industry a little bit. So I think we need to take a step back as an industry. We need to recognize that as an industry, we are a bunch of individual companies, and so then we need to act responsibly. We also need to work in a paradigm where money is not free anymore, and there are lots of other alternatives. And so, I'm sounding like a broken record here. So I think you've got to go back to alternative protein serving, one or two challenges. Number one is food security, price, availability, quality of food, or sustainability. Because at the end of the day, alternative protein is essentially a low footprint food, either low carbon footprint or low water footprint. That's why we produce alternative protein. So you have to tick either one or hopefully two of those boxes. Yeah.
Simple.
But also, as the panels have been saying, we don't want to just keep saying alternative, because I do believe it's complementary. And I think because we know nutrition is a challenge, we need to get protein for people that don't have access. So I think the opportunity is still there. We all know how many car makers there were at the turn of the last century. Over 100 of them in the US making cars. Then that crashed away. We're going to see the same thing with complementary proteins in the short term. But in terms of Singapore, there's a great opportunity there. We've seen, with Alex and Tyndall sort of moving out so very well. Eugene with Sophie's. We're seeing so many companies. Talent is attracted to Singapore, and then it sort of gets it right there and then moves out. So in terms of how Singapore is going to work, I think they have to sort of double down. And I think in terms of it being a hub, hub doesn't just mean from here to there. It's how it works with Thailand, how it works with Australia, how it works with the rest of Asia as a sort of complementary in terms of developing protein solutions.
And maybe I'll just focus on financing and capital. So you've got venture capital, growth equity. Venture capital, small sums of money for large stakes in companies, highly speculative, highly risky. So that's one bucket. Then you've got growth equity, which is essentially taking a company and scaling it up. But traditionally, these are companies that the technology is reasonably mature, there's good product market fit, there's revenue, etc. Now, when you have a company coming to market with a multi-$100 million valuation in the current environment, and you're pitching that as growth equity, that's a really tough ask in this environment. So the one thing that needs to change, I think, is the mindset around revenue, which is sanity at the end of the day, or at least a path to profitability, I should say. And then I think there needs to be a readjustment in valuation such that buyer-seller, if you like, or investor-investee expectations meet. Yeah.
And then the last one for today's panel. So how are we benefiting planet and the people of the land? So impact and sustainability, we know, have really fueled and framed the discourse of agri-food tech, especially in the last 3 years. But we also know that in food and ag, the economics matter. So both from the consumer side, the business side, the investor, and also the farmer. So I want to ask the panel, how do you see this taking off in Asia? Like, will sustainability take off, or how does that look like?
I'll have a go first. I've been working on a strategy for the past 12 months, and it's really interesting. If you go to Europe and you talk about sustainability, it's a good discussion. It's an easy discussion, and there'll actually be a recognition that sometimes you may need to flex on returns. If you're marketing in Asia, you typically don't talk about impact because you're going to lose your audience pretty quickly. So there's far more appeal, I guess, in Europe. Yeah. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that there is, for those of you that are really focused on sustainability, there's a few things that impact investors look for. So number one, is ESG and sustainability intrinsic to your business? It's not a sideshow, but it needs to be the core of what you do. And the reason for that is you're making an investment now and hopefully for the next few years, so you want to make sure there is no scope creep. So intrinsicality is important for that, number one. The second thing is, and really important, is data. Now, we've heard a lot of times today that there are no standards for ESG and sustainability. That's actually a good thing. because that allows your companies to create a narrative and to tell stories which you can then convince your stakeholders. And so what you need to do is to have KPIs, which are fundamentally coalesce with the Sustainable Development Goals, or the indicators under the Sustainable Development Goals. You need to be able to articulate, measure, verify, and externalize. And if you can do that, that makes your company all the more valuable, or the other way to look at that is if you're not doing that, you're leaving value on the table. So that is a big part of ESG and sustainability investing. And so everyone in this room, every corporate in this room should be looking to do that.
Adam?
Well, it just absolutely, it has to. If we have any hope of 1.5 degrees, sustainability does have to become a huge focus here. The things that Asia has to do is around nature-based solutions. Matilda was talking about land use. We have to change things. If we don't, we will have no chance of 1.5 degrees. So people are getting, real people in this room are doing amazing things, and that's why we need better models of collaboration. I mean, what Bev and Grow Asia are doing, bringing people together. We just have to focus on this differently. It's not negotiable. And things like waste, Nitz raised it again. I mean, what are we doing about waste? Year after year, we keep seeing it. Also, I mean, one of the biggest waste that never seems to get talked about is, crop disease. Before it's even harvested, we're losing 30–40%. So hopefully with AI over the years, we can improve detection, and so we at least will save the 30% that we waste. There's potentially 60%. There's so much being wasted that we've got to focus on these things if we're going to be serious about sustainability.
Any last comments?
From the waste that he talked about. So yes, one of the elements which is, and particularly for countries which are heavily dependent on agriculture, and therefore the climate becomes important. So this whole, what India started doing, and it's worth mentioning here, 2023 was declared the year of by the UN as the year of the millets. That is a small step in that direction, which is cultivating crops which are more climate resilient, and therefore moving and that is, while the government is encouraging it, it's actually the consumers who are being encouraged to consume those products, which were traditionally, before the Green Revolution happened, those were the crops which are being consumed, and I think moving in that direction is a step towards greater climatically suitable croppings, and that's a good place to start with. Talking about food waste, I think that's another area. There's food loss, which is at the agriculture space, which Adam talked about. But I was reading recently that we're almost touching 1 billion tons of food waste. And which are the countries which have the highest food waste? What's your guess? No, it's China, followed by India. So it's 90 million tons in China and about 69 million tons in India. The per capita number is much higher in the US, but the total waste. So I think for, those are areas that can be probably addressed with lesser effort. I mean, it's just about more awareness about how food is created, how the whole management of the supply chain. So I think these are areas which we can probably address in the short run as we continue to build our long-term efforts on ESG and climate change.
Okay, so we've only just scratched the surface, but I guess just food for thought for you to continue to chew on as you get a drink. Oh, I see a question. Do we have time for? We have? Yeah. Okay, Nitsa.
I had to take this question only because I want to sabotage the future picture where it will look like that, missing all the women, from. So.
Thank you.
This is the first idea. Now for the question, and it is related to the last topics. We heard along the day about regenerative agriculture, soil health, which I think it's very important. On the other hand, we are facing like almost science fiction food and methodology of production of food. And in the future, which is maybe now, I don't know, I need your honest opinion. Is one of these trends will take over? Can we find a hybrid? What will happen with these two major trends? it's very, I think, interesting question to understand as an investor, as an entrepreneur.
Who would like to take that?
Because I didn't get the few trends that you're talking about. What exactly?
So was the question which trend will really dominate our
Which is
current
the-
food system, if at all, and if so, or whether there's two that might be
No, so
fault line?
I mean, from my perspective, what I see is that there is this urgent need to address the agriculture part of it. Whether it's because, and the question to ask is that who's addressing it? The small farmer is not going to address it. It's going to be people like those sitting in this room. The governments are trying to address it, but I guess this is not their biggest priority. I mean, they're busy fighting to stay in the government. It is really about, is the industry addressing it? No, because they don't directly connect with the farmer. They go through aggregators or whatever. So when I see people in this room and those who talked about it and people in this room who are willing to fund those efforts, I think that's a very laudable space, something that one actually needs to respect and support because I've been part of large companies, interacted with large companies. They have got their business going, right? So they are not going to be, while they will support whatever they can, but the corrective measures have to come from people who are willing to take more risk and will therefore need to be backed by risk capital, which is what is part of it is sitting in this room. So that trend certainly. Similarly, for creating healthier food, why would the large companies who've been supplying food forever want a disruption in that, right? I mean, while they want to do that, they're making those incremental changes. It is the innovators, but those innovators require that support. It is that they take the risk. They don't have, their opportunity is that they don't have a large canvas that they will have to disrupt. They can start small, but they will need that support from those investors who are willing to back them. And I think this combination of risk takers and risk investors is needed to bring the change or to set the trend. And I'm sure as these things grow big, there'll be enough large companies out there to buy them out.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you go to Harvard Business School, they teach a whole module on explore and exploit and explore. So basically how big companies will keep their core markets and then what big companies need to do to innovate. And it's really, really difficult. So the challenge and the opportunity for everyone in this room, essentially, particularly the early stage companies and startups, is to foster that innovation and then find a willing partner for a trade sale at a really good valuation and do well and do good at the same time. So that's just the way things work. Yeah, so it's an opportunity.
And Nitsa, I mean, I think it's working all ends, as you said. What Anthony is doing with soil, I mean, let's get back to basics because that's so important. We haven't talked about the blue economy at all. So much work needs to be there. And then a diverse range of proteins on our plate. Not that, the 12 plants that provide, 75% of the world at the moment. So I think there's lots of pillars that we can look at, but they all have to be working. We can't say one thing is going to be the answer. And then it's, as you're saying, it's a new and different collaboration and financial models that we're just going to have to do. Look what we did during the pandemic. We treated it as war. We still are not treating climate as war. And I think we're going to hit a tipping point when things start to happen and people will say, in the next 24 hours, we have to actually do something. And that's, yeah.
And 30 seconds on that because we didn't get to blue economy, but think about the country with the most pronounced food security issues globally, it's China. And then you think about how 70% of the world's aquaculture is in China. Now, there are huge social and economic problems associated with that because of supply chain structure. But that is a subsector that is entirely disruptible, and it is a way to produce food if done correctly, with a very low carbon and potentially very low water footprint. And so my prediction for the next 10 years is that subsector is going to be one of the most fertile across the whole food and agri arena. So I'm happy to come back in 10 years' time and see if I'm right or not.
Okay, all right, that's it. Okay, all right, thank you everyone, and I'll hand it back. Oh. Thank you, the panel.
And just before we end the day, I would like to invite Renhua for the final closing.
So first of all, where did Josh go? So first of all, big round of applause to Josh. I think although you lowered the average age of the old man panel by 25%, I sincerely mean it that when we look at, more experienced, and they're all friends, right? To Siraj and to Patrick, and the experience and the generosity, really measures. So that was a fantastic panel. Big round of applause again to Josh and our friends. And Josh will always lower the average age of the panels in the future. So that's it. 10 hours. It's been 3 months of hard work. Special thanks to the conference organizers. Special thanks to our partners, Masik and Rethink. And probably about 2.5 months, 3 months of hard work and culminating in essentially 8 to 9 hours of incredible conversation. If we think about how we started in the morning, thinking on the agri-food value chain. We talked about the linear value chain. We talked about the spectrum of agri-food. And essentially, I think from morning to evening, we painted a rainbow, starting from upstream, thinking about soil, carbon, decarbonization, going to midstream, thinking about partnerships, and then going to plant-based, cell-based, and then finally nutrition, medicine, and future. So I think it's been a beautiful journey, a beautiful 10 hours of how we are very appreciative for your support as we try to traverse, what we try to do to the best we can on behalf of Taiwan, Temasek, and Rethink to traverse across in one day the rainbow of agri and food, starting from farm to shelf. Before we sum up, I think there's been some incredible content. I'd like to express 3 points of gratitude to really close off SEA 2023 and book your tickets at the Banyan Tree Bangkok for SEA 2024 sometime in May next year. So the first point is really around quality. I think, compared this year to last year, it's the second time we're doing it. For us here at Taiwan and Temasek, we're not, full-time event organizers. We do this purely out of passion, out of servitude, out of commitment. But today we had amazing, amazing, high-quality conversations. So a big round of applause. I'd like to thank all the moderators for today who created some incredible content across the whole. Please give a warm round of applause to thank all the moderators, Joan, Hitesh, Erin, John, Gam, Merte, Adrian, and Josh. I think, the power of the moderator to manage the energy, to set the tone, to keep us all fully engaged. Where else do you go for a conference and at 4 or 5 p.m. everyone is listening, writing, and constantly committed to what people are. So thank you so much to everyone and to the moderators for doing an excellent session. And part of the high quality is really about driving the right conversations. So, in the morning, Ryan talked about the last mile. Martin from Thai Union talked about plant-based 2.0. We heard Patrick talk about food as medicine. And a lot of these conversations will continue, going into the next 6 months and 12 months. And we come back here, 364 days from now, we remember those conversations when we get around as a community. So that's the first point that I want to express my gratitude to everyone of the notion of quality and really committing that SEA will have this very curated platform of high quality conversations. The second one is very close to heart, and that's around diversity. Today, a warm round of applause to everyone. We are 45% female for SEA 2020-23. I don't know what the benchmark is. We don't know what the benchmark is, but I think 45% is an excellent number. To many of our friends and mentors, to Bev and Merte and to Erin and Gam and my sister Ren Yong, it's a very proud moment that we can say that we are curating a leadership community. We are curating some of the best thought leaders, innovators, curators in the region, and it's 45% female. So all I can say is next year we're going to aim for 51% female, because that's the next bar. And Joshua, you can moderate that panel. The second point is around geographical diversity. So this one, compared to previous years, was much more balanced. This year we had about 1/3 from Thailand and Bangkok ecosystem, 1/3 from Singapore, 1/3 from around the world. So a big round of applause to thank to all our friends who flew in from India, from China, from Israel, from Australia, from Europe. A big round of thanks to thank to everyone who took the long plane, the long flights, and coming into the traffic jams. And finally, around functional diversity. It's very important to us as in terms of curating this platform is a very balanced mix between VCs, corporates, entrepreneurs, founders, and research. So diversity is the second point I'd like you to take away as something that's special to all of us in building SEA together. Like diversity of experience, of gender, of functions, of professional knowledge, of truly building something beyond our own purpose. And finally, the third point is around intimacy. The intimacy of SEA and my biggest motivation, my biggest inspiration is really in the conversations. So 9 hours is something that we spend together, but the greatest intimacy and the greatest friendships are in the conversations after this, over drinks, in last night's dinner, in today's lunch. And the intimacy that you know that when you're here and when you go back home tomorrow and you fly off to your own respective countries, that hopefully you had 10 more friends, you had 5 more partners, and you've got allies in this beautiful journey as we traverse through the rainbow of Southeast Asia agri-food. So on that final note, I'd like to thank you for the 3 points. I'd like to express my gratitude on behalf of Taiwan, Temasek, and Rethink to all of you for the high quality, for the diversity, and for the intimacy, and safe travels tomorrow. Khop khun mak kap, sawadee kap. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And just before we leave, I know you're, some of you are going home, but we have networking cocktails as well. But could I ask everyone to come on stage for a group picture? I think we have a lot of people. It's going to be fun. Please get up. Good closing. Hey, yes, please get on stage. Everyone get on stage and we'll arrange. Okay, Josh, on stage, you first, Merte. Okay, Yvonne, Adam, Anthony, please. Okay, everyone, please get on stage. We'll find a spot somehow. It's okay. Yes, 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 yes. Nice to meet you. Everyone, please make sure you're seen. Marie, in front.
Short, right?
Sorry. We can fit. Trust me, we can fit. We'll find a way. Sorry, guys. Just a quick one picture on stage. We'll fit, let's go. โอเคค่ะโอเคค่ะ a small ask but that row on the stage the front row when we say 1 2 3 just come down a little bit okay I know it's hard all right เอาเร็วๆค่ะเอารัวๆโอเคไปเรื่อยๆโอเคยังไม่ไหวแล้ว
Okay, so motions, can you bye-bye? Bye-bye. See you next year. Thank you.
Okay, one last
Can we do
one.
another one? Hey.
Hey.
1, 2, 3. Hey! One more. Hey!
Okay, 1 2 3 hey okay thank you so much just a reminder, we've got drinks upstairs with live music, and we have promised lots and lots of alcohol. Please head to